Well, I appreciate Greg leading that song, but I did ask him to sing it like Elvis sings it. And there's a little difference there. Okay, so. Well, I'm surprised that I don't see any costumes. It is Halloween, but I understand. I'm going to start this morning with a statement that I never use at the beginning of a presentation, but I'm going to use it this morning because it's true. I am really excited about this lesson this morning. That doesn't mean that you will necessarily be excited about it. It doesn't mean that you will necessarily find it interesting. It doesn't mean that you will necessarily find it applicable. But for me, I'm really excited about this particular lesson at the end of the book of Acts. For it returns to a subject that I have thought a lot about over the last few years at least. And it is a subject that has had major impact on my life. I haven't gotten to the point I want to be with it, but it is a very, very life-changing subject if we'll let it be. I'm talking about the subject of trust. This lesson this morning is about this thing of trust. And I've told you so many times that trust is the foundation for joy. And trust is the foundation for peace. It's the foundation for hope. And it is essential, absolutely essential, if we are going to please God. And yet, while I know all of that, I find there are certain times in life when I have such difficulty with trust. Certain circumstances arise, and I have such difficulty putting my trust in God and turning things over to Him. Maybe you have the same problem. The story comes from Acts chapter 27. It's a story of suspense. It's a story of loss, a story of fear, and a story of victory. You may remember that Paul has been in a Roman prison for 2 years. The Roman governor has been Felix. But now Felix is being replaced by another Roman governor whose name is Festus. For some reason, Festus really wants to please the Jews. Though he's a Roman governor, he really wants to please the Jewish population. And they come and they bring all their accusations against Paul, but one of their requests is, will you return Paul back to Jerusalem for trial? The reason is they have a plot to kill Paul. And so finally Festus will say, Paul, are you willing to go back to Jerusalem? And Paul says something that may be a shock to Festus. He reveals that he is a Roman citizen and that he is going to exercise his right to appeal directly to Caesar. And as you read it, almost seems like it throws Festus into a quandary for a moment, but he soon realizes, I have no choice. If he appealed to Caesar, I've got to send him there. And so now the story begins to unfold. A Roman centurion named Julius is selected by Festus. The centurion, along with his soldiers, take Paul and some other prisoners, and they board a ship. They're going to slowly make their way to Rome. They board this ship and they are sailing. First day out, you see that Julius, this Roman centurion, has great kindness and fondness for Paul because he lets him go ashore to meet his friends so that his needs might be met by his friends. They continue their voyage then. It's a difficult voyage. The winds are not cooperating. And as you well know, the ships in that day are sailboats. They're driven by the wind. And the wind is not cooperating, and they make their way slowly until they finally arrive at a certain harbor. And then the ship has to be changed. The centurion looks for another ship that's going to take them farther toward Italy. And he finds an Alexandrian ship. The Alexandrian ship is a cargo ship or a merchant ship, and the centurion boards passage for himself, his soldiers, for Paul, and the other prisoners. And they begin to make their way on this voyage. but the winds are still not cooperating. The winds are very, very difficult. And so they're having to hover for a while close to the shoreline of an island. And then they can't even sail the ship because the winds are too strong. And so they're kind of driven along. And they finally reach a harbor called Fair Havens. And they dock there for a moment, and Paul has a suggestion. Now, Burke's going to put all this on the screen. Verse 9, I think it is. Paul's going to speak and says, much time has been lost. Sailing had become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. It's too late in the year to be sailing, according to Paul. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be dangerous. It's going to bring great loss to ship, cargo, and our own lives. But instead of listening to Paul, the centurion listened to the owner of the ship and the pilot of the ship. And they want to continue. They don't think Fair Havens is the right kind of harbor to spend the winter in. And so they begin to sail. The first day out, it's a smooth, gentle south wind. It all seems fine. But the next day, things change. There is a wind called a nor'easter or northeaster that's of hurricane force. Now, you may have read some news this last week. I've kind of quit the news, but I saw a little bit about this, about a nor'easter hit the East Coast, the state of Massachusetts, and it's done a lot of damage. And I've never been in a hurricane, and probably you haven't been in a hurricane. But we've seen the effects, haven't we? And we've seen them with all these winds driving against the coast of our country. But you have to understand that when a hurricane of giant force hits land, the energy is quickly dissipated. Those winds hit buildings, and they hit trees, and they hit land masses, and there's friction loss there, and the energy is dissipated, though it does much damage. But out in the ocean, there are obviously no trees, and there are no land masses, and those winds continue to build and get stronger and stronger, and the waves are the only thing that captures the wind, and they begin to roll. And can you imagine being in a wooden ship? I call it more like a boat of that day. In a sea like that. I've told you before, I don't like ships. I don't like boats. I don't like to be in large water masses where I cannot see land, and to think that it's 100 feet below me, or it's 500 feet below me, or it's a mile below me. I just don't like it. Can you imagine being in that kind of situation? And you're bounced back and forth, and your sails do no good. There's no way you're going to sail. And it is so bad that they decide that they could easily be dashed against rocks and the ship would fall apart, and so they pass ropes. I don't know how they did this, but in that wild sea, they pass ropes under the hull of that ship to try to reinforce those wooden planks. Now, had I been there and I saw them taking out ropes to reinforce the structure, it would have made things far worse for me. So you can begin to feel, can't you, what this is like? And they go just another little bit of time, a couple of days, and it's not working. And so they take the ship's cargo and they throw it overboard. That's the merchant ship. That's the owner's livelihood. And there are times, I suppose, in this life when you and I get those kind of situations where we realize that all the things that we fall in love with in this world don't matter very much. All the things that we have fallen in love with in this world with don't matter so much when it comes to whether we're going to live or die. And sometimes people say to other people, maybe a medical professional will say to someone, if you don't change your lifestyle, if you don't change and give up this and quit this job and do this, you're not going to be able to survive. And some wise people say, okay, I'm hearing you, and they put it aside in order to live. Other people, not so wise, keep holding on to these things that we love so much in this world, to their own peril and to their own loss and to their own destruction. Happens all the time. Happens with addictions, all kinds of things. Cargo goes overboard. It's not enough. 3 days later, they throw the ship's tackle overboard. Now, I'm not a sea person, so I don't know what it means ship's tackle, but I assume that's what they use to hoist the sails and to drive the ship and to keep everything functioning. And they throw it overboard because they're just being driven back and forth. They don't know where they are. In fact, it is so bad. You read in verse 20 these words, and I want you to look at the very last part of this. The first part's kind of interesting too. Neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. The storm continued to rage. The sun, the stars, no light whatsoever. Now, what does that do to you? Does that make it worse? I mean, I'm out here in the middle of a body of water, and I'm being bounced around, and I've thrown everything overboard I can afford to throw over right now, and I can't see anything. When there is no light whatsoever, sun, moon, stars, nothing, it gets pretty black, doesn't it? It gets pretty black. And now you can't see. And so the result of all this is we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Now I hope you underline that particular phrase. Those of you who are in the building, those of you who are listening at a distance, we gave up all hope. Luke is the writer. Get the impression he's with them. Losing all hope is really serious. Because when you lose all hope, the only thing left is despair and to give up. And we see it all the time in this life. People losing all hope. And there are familiar, very familiar situations that we know about. You ever been in a job or known anybody in a job? Miserable, horrible conditions. And they need the job, but they can hardly bear to be there. And nothing ever changes. They keep hoping it'll change. Nothing ever changes. And finally, they lose all hope. It's never going to change. What do you do? And I know you know that there are husbands and wives everywhere. And they've tried to make a go of it, and they try to make a go of it, or she does, or he does, but nothing ever changes until they finally just give up. There's no hope that this will ever change, get any better. And people do that with life itself. People endure such burdens in this life and such difficulties, and they can't find one shred of hope that it's going to get any better whatsoever. And when you get to that point, despair sets in, and you want to give up. And people give up all the time. What's the use of continuing to live? And they end their own lives out of hopelessness and despair. We lost all hope of being saved. Have you ever been in that situation? Have you ever been in difficult situations where you just didn't see how it could ever work, and you felt yourself sinking into discouragement deeper and deeper until finally it reached despair? Well, it happens. But now something kind of interesting happens. Paul begins to speak, and Burke has that on the screen too. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul said to them, "Man, you should have taken my advice not to sail. We wouldn't be in this mess." Now, I don't know why he kind of put that in there. It's that "I told you so" type statement. But after he gets past that, he says, "Look, I urge you to keep up your courage. Now, had he stopped there, it would be totally meaningless language. And you may not like what I'm about to say, and I could be very wrong about it. But you and I may have a bad habit of doing just of stopping right there. So somebody's really discouraged, and somebody's almost in despair, and somebody's about to give up, and we come along and say, it'll get better, it'll be okay. Be encouraged. I'm kind of wondering if sometimes our idle statements like that, when we don't know what we're talking about, make matters worse. Could it? But this is not idle talk. He has a reason behind why he can say it's going to get better. And so he says, because not a one of you will be lost. The ship's going to be destroyed. But let me tell you what happened to me. An angel, last night, in the blackness of that night, in the rage of the storm, an angel from God spoke to me. And that angel told me, it's going to be okay. Because you have to go to Rome. You have to go to Rome. And you and all these men who are with you are going to be survivors of this storm. The ship will be lost, but you're going to survive. Now, it's a call to trust. Paul now knows his trust in God is complete. He knows it'll be okay. But imagine if you were one of these men. Who is this God of yours, Paul? Would you have that question? And you're telling me an angel really spoke to you? It's a call for them to trust also. And so the storm keeps raging. Do you remember how long this storm lasts? 14 days. 14 days of blackness. 14 days of being bounced back and forth. 14 days of seasickness. 14 days thinking any moment this may be my last bit of life. But Paul will speak to him. And Paul will say, you men need to take some food. You need to take some food. It's going to be all right. I'm telling you again, no one will be lost. But now they discover as they go that they think they're getting close to land. They can't see it. But somehow those sailors, those experienced sailors, sense it. So they take a depth reading. It's 120 feet. A little while later, take another depth reading. It's only 90 feet. Now, these experienced sailors know that it would be so easy in this blackness of the night to be dashed against the rocks on the shore and everything be broken to pieces and all their lives be lost. And so there's a lifeboat. There's a lifeboat. And the sailors start fiddling with the lifeboat. My word, fiddling. Their idea is we'll take our chances in this little boat and we'll escape. Paul sees it. And Paul says to the centurion, who seems to be making all the decisions, if they leave, we're all going to be destroyed. They have to stay in the boat. They have to stay with it if this is going to work. Now, I know there have been a lot of lessons given on that phrase, and I'm not giving a lesson on that phrase, but I want to tell you something. You have to stay with it. You have to stay with it, depending on God, if it's going to work. There is a statement made in the book of Hebrews. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. That word faith is synonymous with the word trust. Without this absolute trust that propels you into diligence before God, you can't please Him. And so if you give up on this, if you don't stay with it, You see, the lifeboat is a symbol of not trusting God. The lifeboat is a symbol of me taking matters into my own hands. They have been told, if you stick with this, God's not going to let anything happen to any of us. The boat will be lost. Cargo's already gone, but you're going to get saved. But they don't. That makes no sense to me. It's kind of what they're thinking. And so they start lowering the boat down. They're going to take matters in their own hands. That's classic Ken Jones. That's classic Ken Jones. I take matters into my own hands all the time. And so many of those times, I mess it up. And so many of those times, I can only imagine how God is looking at me and feeling. If you would just settle down and stick with it and put your confidence in me, I'll work this out. And so Paul speaks to the centurion. I think the centurion's kind of learned his lesson, don't you? He orders the ropes to be cut to the lifeboat. Is that faith? Is that trust? Cut the ropes. It's gone. And so they continue to be driven by the winds. In just a little while, they strike a sandbar, and the boat comes to pieces. It's broken. And they begin to make their way. Some of those sailors can swim. Some of those people can swim. Some of them get a hold of little pieces of wreckage, and they make their way to the shore. When they get to the shore, 276 people had been on board that ship. How many are on shore together? Can you guess? All 276, just exactly like God said. And the story's not over. The story is not over. Because they get on this island now, the island of Malta. And the natives there are so welcoming, and they know what these men have been through. The men are wet, the men are cold, the men are hungry, the men are starved. And they pile up a big bunch of wood. And they're going to warm everybody. But as that fire begins to go, a viper, a poisonous snake, comes out of that pile of wood and latches onto Paul. Now, typical Ken would have said, oh, after all that, now I'm going to die from snake bite? You know what Paul does? To the amazement of the islanders are looking at this thinking, wow, he's gone. He's dead. Nobody can survive this. Paul just shakes it off. Pays no attention to it. I wonder why. Because God told him this truth. You are going to Rome. And a raging storm over 14 days couldn't stop him. Now, let me rephrase that. Couldn't stop God. And a poisonous snake is not going to stop God. And Paul knows it. He's going to Rome. He puts his confidence completely in the Father in the most difficult of situations. And I'm telling you, if you don't do that, if you don't learn how to do that, despair and discouragement so easily sets in. And right now, how many of us have situations that seem so hopeless and cause us to be so discouraged? Don't we all? I left the nursing home this morning in tears. Literally. Seems hopeless. I look at what's happening in our nation at times, I think it's just hopeless. China is on a mission to take us over. There's no doubt about it. And yet, who's in control? And to whom do we speak every single day? And who receives our pleas and our begging? It's the same God who doesn't change one tiny bit, who saved Paul on that ship, who saved Paul from that snake. And so we look to him who has saved us and say, it's up to you. I will live in the hope that resides only in you. Isn't that something? Isn't that an amazing way to live? And that's what we've been called to. Jesus went to the cross. He was God. I can't wrap my mind around that one either. But as he went to that cross, he was a man. And he did not want to do it. With his own mouth, he pleads, get me out of this. Figure another way. But then he says, but it's your way. I'll follow your way. And he was expecting. He had said it to his apostles, if they couldn't understand it. He was expecting that on the third day, he'd be back to life. But he let them beat him and nail him and destroy him because he had confidence that his Father would do what his Father said he would do. He's the picture of the ability to trust. In his sacrifice, he's the picture. So let's think about that as we take the emblems this morning of what Jesus did in trusting. I know I can't be as stout as Jesus. I know I can't be as perfect as Jesus. And though I've tried for the last 4 years or so to learn how to trust in every situation, I fail over and over and over again, even today. But let's think about what Jesus did. Let's learn this concept of putting our confidence somewhere else. That life might be as abundant as God planned for it to be.